David Marshall walked into the courtroom with calm confidence, yet all eyes were on him with sneers and whispers. They laughed, mocked, and judged him before the first word was spoken. No one knew who he truly was. To them, he was just another defendant. But behind that calm exterior lay a truth so shocking it would turn the room upside down. How could they mock a man who held the nation's highest secrets? David had always moved through life with quiet dignity, the kind of calm that only comes from knowing your purpose. Every morning he walked the same path to the courthouse, briefcase in hand, greeting familiar faces with a polite nod. Outside the courtroom, life seemed ordinary. He worked hard, kept to himself, and carried the weight of responsibility with effortless grace. Friends knew him as intelligent, composed, and unshakable, a man who handled pressure with a steady hand. But beneath that composure, his life had been a constant balancing act. Years of proving himself in spaces where skepticism followed him like a shadow had honed him, teaching him when to speak and when to let silence speak for him. Despite his accomplishments, every glance that lingered too long, every whispered comment, reminded him that prejudice was never far behind. That morning, the courthouse buzzed with its usual chaos. Lawyers hurried past, clerks shuffled papers, and the faint murmur of anticipation hung in the air. He stepped into the room, expecting the usual formalities. Yet something felt different. The whispers were sharper, the eyes colder, and the subtle smirks more pronounced. He sensed it before anyone spoke, a tension rooted not in law, but in bias. And he knew, even then, that today would not be like the others. Today, the walls of that courtroom would reveal something far more than legal arguments. The courtroom was alive with the usual shuffle of papers, murmurs of lawyers, and the distant tapping of shoes against polished floors. But the moment David walked in, the atmosphere shifted. Eyes followed him, sharp and scrutinizing, lingering just a fraction too long. He could feel the subtle weight of judgment pressing down on him, not for what he had done, but for the color of his skin. The laughter started softly at first, a few smirks across the room. Then, as the session began, it grew bolder, louder, almost deliberate. They mocked him, whispered jokes about his appearance, chuckles that carried over the courtroom. Lawyers exchanged glances, sneering just slightly, their condescension thinly veiled as casual observation. The bailiff's eyes flickered with discomfort, but no one spoke up. David took a deep breath, steadying himself, aware that every movement, every measured word was being watched and judged unfairly. In the sea of disbelief, it was clear. He wasn't being treated like the person he truly was. He was being reduced to a stereotype, a target of ridicule in a place that was supposed to embody justice. The questioning began. Each query carried a subtle bias, a hidden presumption. He answered calmly, logically, letting the facts speak for themselves. But as the minutes ticked by, it became obvious that facts didn't matter here. Prejudice did. The courtroom laughed at small missteps, twisted his words, dismissed his expertise. With every passing second, the tension coiled tighter, the injustice sharpening like a blade. Then came the moment that froze the room, a flippant remark from the prosecutor, a casual insult masked as humor. The laughter erupted again, louder this time, echoing against the walls. For a heartbeat, David felt the sting of humiliation, the unfairness of being demeaned simply for who he was. The room seemed smaller, the air heavier, and in that instant, he realized just how deep the bias ran, how unnoticed and unchecked it had been, until now. But beneath the surface, a quiet power simmered. He was not merely a man standing trial. He was someone who held authority few could imagine. He had spent years navigating corridors of power, making decisions that shaped outcomes far beyond this room. Yet here, in the face of mockery and disdain, he remained invisible to them. They did not know who he really was. They could not yet see the truth. As the laughter faded and the court settled into uneasy silence, the air was thick with anticipation. Something was about to shift. The ridicule, the injustice, the whispers, they were all building toward a revelation that no one in that room would forget. And in that heavy, charged moment, the question hung in the air. What happens when those who mock the powerless realize they have underestimated the most powerful person in the room? The courtroom air felt electrified, every heartbeat louder than the last. David rose slowly, a figure of calm in the storm of eyes, some filled with derision, others with casual curiosity. In that moment, he carried a weight far greater than anyone could see. Every smirk, every whispered joke, every glance fueled a tension that had been building for years. He took a measured breath and the room seemed to hold its own. Then quietly, deliberately, he revealed the truth. The words were simple, but they struck like thunder. The man they had ridiculed, assumed powerless, was the director of the FBI. A silence fell so heavy it pressed against the walls. Shock rippled across faces. Jaws dropped, eyes widened. Their laughter, their mockery, vanished instantly, replaced by disbelief and, for some, fear. For a heartbeat, the injustice hung in the balance. All the mockery, the assumptions, the subtle prejudices, they collided with the revelation, exposing every flawed judgment in stark relief. David could feel the weight of their surprise, the sudden awareness of the power they had underestimated. The courtroom that had mocked him now held its breath, unsure how to respond. And in that suspended moment, a mix of emotions surged: anger at the injustice, relief at the vindication, and a quiet hope that truth could pierce prejudice. He remained composed, letting the tension speak louder than words, letting the revelation land fully. The room was no longer the same. Assumptions had been shattered. And as he took his seat again, the thought lingered in the air like a question no one dared voice aloud. How many others would continue to judge without knowing until they faced the same truth? As the courtroom slowly returned to its routine, the weight of the moment lingered like a shadow over every person present. David sat back down, calm, measured, yet profoundly aware of what had just transpired. The mockery, the laughter, the disbelief. It had all collided with the undeniable truth, leaving a mark that could not be erased. For him, it was not about revenge or humiliation. It was a quiet victory for dignity, a reminder that assumptions and prejudice could never define the truth of a person's worth. Outside the courtroom, whispers followed him, some tinged with respect, others with stunned disbelief. But the lesson had been delivered. In a society where bias often goes unnoticed, where judgments are made before facts are considered, this moment shone a light on the invisible barriers faced every day by countless individuals. It revealed the cost of underestimating someone because of the color of their skin, the weight of stereotypes that persist even in institutions meant to uphold justice. For David, the experience reaffirmed a truth he had carried all his life: that power and resilience are not always visible, and dignity cannot be stripped away by the narrow vision of others. Yet he also understood the fragility of perception, how easily people could be blinded by prejudice, and how necessary it was to confront it wherever it appears. And as he walked out of the courthouse, composed yet unshakable, the question echoed: how many others endure mockery, dismissal, or bias without the means to reveal their truth? This was more than a single courtroom incident. It was a reflection of a larger reality, challenging each of us to look beyond assumptions, to question prejudice, and to stand up when injustice appears. Because if we fail to see, to listen, and to act, how many truths will remain hidden, and how many lives will continue to be defined by what others think rather than who they truly are?